As Wayne said, my name is Tandridge and I'm the CEO of the Validity Group. Since 2006, we've been working with and supporting clients across numerous industry sectors across the region. And I'd like to thank you all for your time and trust that during the next 30 minutes or so, I can give you a real sense about how we've successfully applied Qstream to solve a number of very real business challenges for a particular client. So let me set the scene here. A good place to start is some of my background. So I'll share my background with you as it's very indicative and very typical of the Validity team members, all of whom bring their very own distinct stories when they work with their clients. So from my perspective, I've got a very many and varied background. I have been in recent times a director of sales and marketing in an organization. And so in that role, I have experienced a whole broad range of responsibilities, which would typically go with a role like that. Once upon a time, many years ago, I carried a bag. So I was selling products. So I was a sales rep and I was selling things like learning management systems and knowledge management systems and so forth. And so I've got the perception of what it's like from a sales rep's point of view, as indeed I have in a previous life. I was a first line sales manager as well. So in that role, I was leading and managing a team across a country. And so I can relate to the issues that the typical sales rep and the typical sales manager at various levels experience and has to deal with on a daily basis. I've worked in local companies and I've worked in global corporations, and I've had responsibilities across countries and across regions. I've also had the pleasure of working in the world of learning and development. And in a role there, I was responsible for a number of programs. We did skills gap analysis and we spent huge amounts of money across multiple regions and countries and thousands of sales personnel. And that all means that from a L&D perspective, I've also got that view of the world as well. So I've sat in meetings, and whether those meetings have been in Singapore or London or Palo Alto, where I've been asked questions and questions that I couldn't answer. The question was typically, so what difference has all this L&D investment made to the bottom line of the business? And I could never really answer that question. I could respond with what we affectionately refer to as the happy sheets. You know, the stuff I mean, the comment sheets, where people say informative stuff like lovely trainer, and I enjoyed it very much. I could very easily deliver lunch reviews and catering reports or even critiques on venues. But what difference was it making to the bottom line of the business? I couldn't really answer that question. But the business needs real solid data, reliable information to base its investment decisions on, to make strategic plans across a broad range of issues. And I know that because I've asked the same questions. In my L&D days, I couldn't tell what was the difference between the smoke and the fire. So in short, I understand the pain of our clients because I've experienced that pain myself. I've had the same conversations that many of the people on this call have probably had. I've asked the same questions and I've tried to get the same answers. So the conversations with our clients are generally based upon a level of mutual understanding, and it's how and whether we can make a contribution to the growth of the business. Which brings me to this case study that I'm presenting today. So this was a high-tech company, and as such, they face challenges which they believe to be pertinent to their industry, but in many cases are implicated across all sorts of industry sectors. So let's start with the conversation that I had with members of their regional leadership team. The challenges that they had, as you see on the screen there, were first of all ROI on training. So it's clear to them that unless they could do something about the ROI on the training budget that they had, they were about to have their budget cut, because it seemed to be this never-ending funnel of money which was not producing anything near what they were hoping in terms of the benefits on their business. The other area that they discussed, and this became very vocal, was inaccurate forecasting. It wasn't just wild, it was way off inaccurate forecasting. In reality, what they believed was happening was that management at various levels was manipulating data to remove what they perceived to be errors. And so those bubbles of behavior throughout the business was having a significant impact upon the accuracy of forecasting, and that was a major problem for them. Their margins were being crushed. Too many deals were being escalated for special pricing. Margins were being brought down dramatically. And yes, they were trying to sell value. And yes, they had lots of training courses on that very subject, but it wasn't translating into change. The other area for their business was channel partners, resellers. And they were an increasing part of their business, increasingly important part of their business. Because they generated increasing amounts of dollars in their target spends, and they were having their reseller network attend their own training events. What they were finding was not only similar impacts in terms of the profitability challenges and the inaccurate forecasting, but the situation was potentially much worse within that market. So in terms of delivery challenges, the challenges that they faced when we started to work with them was on bringing people into events. This current situation is one where none of us can hold training events, and distance learning remains a challenge. It's a challenge because it presents and delivers new challenges for us. And in this case, they're certainly struggling with that. So they needed a solution which was going to expand this remote learning across a diverse audience. And they needed a solution that would engage all of their Salesforce members, not only across this region, but potentially across other regions as well. So in other words, what they were experiencing was the same people who were not learning in the training room are now not learning on a video call as well. So now especially we need them to have very different skills, because now they're not selling through a face-to-face meeting, they're selling through a digital meeting, and that's different. So in short, this was a plea for help. So to solve those issues, we needed a solution that would gain high levels of usage across the entire sales team, that would dramatically improve the knowledge levels and the application of that knowledge. We needed to provide solid and reliable data points on which the business decisions could be made and that all the stakeholders could rely on. And so we made a decision to use Qstream as our solution platform. So we had a number of considerations in the selection of this as the most suitable platform for us to use. We had to cover a very broad geographic area. So we had personnel in India all the way through to Japan in this instance. So it had to cover lots of geographic areas and numerous time zones. And we also had to deal with 2 additional languages in terms of Japanese and Korean. The solution had to be easy to engage with and shouldn't distract the sales force from their real job. So we had to be very mindful and respectful of their time. It had to be highly interactive. We had to gain people's involvement and buy-in. And again, no matter the culture, it had to fit and it had to work. The content was going to be the client's own, which is generally the case with our clients. So it's their own content, and it had to be presented so that it's an easy form of consumption within Qstream, and it's going to have a high value takeaway for people to participate with. It had to be flexible because we could anticipate, because of the nature of their business, they would have to be agile and potentially respond to different market pressures very quickly. And of course, the data that we generated had to be accurate. So the solution from our mind was, without question, Qstream. It fulfilled all those requirements and more. Our client had no spare internal resources other than a project lead. So our own services team would assist and support to make this as straightforward as possible for the client. It had to be painless. The brief to our services team was to remove any pain and to remove any and all speed humps. So based on that, some of you might not be familiar with Qstream. So allow me just a little bit of time to just provide some credentials for Qstream, because I want to be very clear here. Qstream is the only scientifically proven tool that we use to increase knowledge retention and change behaviors. And we're extremely confident in its abilities from its origins in Harvard to be able to do that. Today, more than ever, our clients are looking to us to deliver a solution that's not just based on a good idea or an interesting concept. There's no appetite to invest in just any idea. They want to know that it works, and they want sound basis in science and fact, and that other organizations have enjoyed success, and because that's what they seek. So Qstream had the pedigree to satisfy our clients' needs. Claims of an increase of 170% in retention of knowledge by Qstream had been clearly and credibly established, and so we felt incredibly comfortable with that. We all know that 79% of all information is forgotten within days, if not a month. So just think about the last webinar you attended, or the last training course, and can you really remember all that it contained? Chances are that you're going to forget most of this webinar within the next 7 to 10 days anyway. So I think that proves my point. So that from that basis, it's quite human, if you like. It's quite normal for us to forget 79% of the information that we're presented with. What we needed to do was to improve on that, and improve on that substantially. So we needed to find this solution and position it so it was going to build what they refer to as these new neural pathways, so that their sales reps could recall the information they needed to be successful. So with that in mind, again, please bear with me while I just again share just a couple of pieces of information with you. So there's 3 ways in which we apply Qstream. So Qstream from an individual contributor is going to have some engagements which are just going to be 3 minutes every second day. Now, I emphasize that because what we can't do is to take up too much of their time. If it's too complex, if it is too much of a sales rep's day, they will not use it. From a first line manager's point of view, they needed to have views and insights that they could use, and that's increasingly important in today's environment, as I'll touch on shortly. And then from a senior management perspective, and such as the people on this call, you need to have access to data, performance analytics that you can actually rely on to make all those sorts of investments that you want. So one of the things that we do know is that unless we get these applications correct, we're going to have a problem. So when I think about what I've done in the past, I remember calling in on one of our offices many years ago and spending a day with a rep. And we did a client call, and it was blatantly obvious to me that in this call, this rep was unable to answer some value questions. He was unable to negotiate and unable to establish value. So then when I got back to the office, I instructed that everyone needed to do negotiation training. And I'm sure that there were some reps a few weeks later sitting in a training room wondering, why on earth am I here? And they had every right to question that. I'd try to be rather omnipotent in my diagnosis of a problem which I believed existed, but I had no basis for that. Now, this was at a time when we had lots of money to spend. So we would run all these training courses almost on a whim. And that's, I guess, what I did. Was I wrong? Absolutely, I was wrong. My frustration outweighed the logic of my approach. And so we needed something which we didn't have. What we needed was a solution such as this. So that we all understand what a sales rep experience is like and where we're getting this data from, what you see now is 5 shots on a mobile device. And so the first thing is it's not going to take a lot of time. So in our particular client's case, they had launched something like 20 different tools to try and help their sales force be more successful. And I include in that their CRM and their LMS and so forth. But that's a lot of stuff for people to interact with. So it was getting to the stage where sales reps were saying, really, no more help. I can't handle any more help. It's taking up too much of my time. So we had to make sure that our client was aware that this was a solution which was not going to be guilty of that. So from left to right, first screen they see is a couple of questions being posed. The second screen shows you that it's constructed in a way which would be meaningful to the rep. So this is a reflection of my average day, puts me in a situation and asks me some questions. Submit the answers as we see on screen 3 there, and immediately I'm told whether I'm right or wrong. So there's that instant feedback, which is important these days. And then, of course, screen 4 gives me the explanation, and this starts to reinforce from the rep's point of view what we need them to know. And yes, we can link in videos and all sorts of stuff. So from that perspective, we're starting to build that knowledge level that we needed in that sales force, and we're doing it in 2 or 3 minutes. So 2 questions, 2 or 3 minutes, probably about 8 o'clock in the morning. So it's not interfering with anybody's day and anybody's time, and that will become apparent as I go through this and talk about the high levels of interaction we had with the tool itself. The other area, of course, is they're involved in a game. Now, as we all know, I guess, is salespeople are incredibly competitive. And so we had them name their own teams. So we had teams competing with teams. We had countries competing with countries. And it's fantastic. Like everybody had a lot of fun, even getting down to choosing the names of their teams and how much fun they were having with all of that. So what we're not doing at this stage with this client is we're not providing them any content. We're using their content. And so we engaged our services team to go in and take their content and, if you like, convert it into Qstream. So it had to be something which was going to apply not only with the platform, but was easy to engage with on a mobile device. So they're a highly experienced and very talented team. So they work with a client. They built those scenarios which would be meaningful to the reps. They discovered as part of this process that some of the language, some of the sales terminology, if you will, would vary from country to country. And so how could we accommodate that? We found a term of reference that worked in Singapore wasn't a term of reference which was applicable in Japan and so forth. So we were able to capture all the key messages for this particular project. And to reinforce that, our team also selected a range of powerful imagery that went with each question to help provide memory triggers and so forth. And I think the client, as well as our team, enjoyed that aspect of the process as well. So where did we start? The first thing we needed to do was to look at this team and get a baseline. So we did a diagnostic. We looked at their sales protocol, their playbook, sales playbook, and we built that into a Qstream, and we run the first Qstream as a diagnostic. And this gave us some data on which we could make some fairly solid and well-founded decisions. We found some information which I don't think took the client completely by surprise. We found that there was 2 major areas which immediately bubbled to the surface. The first one was around qualification and their qualification process. And the second area was around negotiation. So as part of that qualification process, when they're qualifying a deal to go from each stage in their sales process, it's got to meet certain metrics. And it became apparent that there was a great deal of confusion. And I'll use South Korea as an example of this. So we had two sales managers managing obviously two separate sales teams who both attended the same sales training, and who'd both misinterpreted what they had been taught about taking a deal from stage 3 to stage 4. So that meant that when they rolled their forecasts up to their country manager, it was wildly inaccurate. When we then expanded that across the region, we found that the interpretation of that training varied considerably from team to team, from country to country. So we were starting to get to some of the basis that they'd raised in the first point, which was their forecasts were wildly inaccurate. So what we were able to do is to sanitize some of that and correct some of that in the first target A Qstream that we ran, which was around qualification, to make sure that this was a primary area and we could bring everybody's knowledge up level to where we needed it. The second area was around negotiation. Again, this targeted back on what one of the key points that the client had raised with us is in terms of their profitability objectives were taking a battering. So that was the first two that we did. So let's cover some of that data before we expand upon where we went to next. So from a first line sales manager's perspective, they were provided with a weekly dashboard, much like you see here. So what that enabled the sales manager to do was to have a look and see where the gaps were, especially in terms of proficiency within their team. And they were able to do that at the end of each week. So this was a dashboard made available to them at the end of each week. So when we spoke to the sales managers, they said, look, historically, we know how valuable ride-alongs are, because historically that's what we've done. Unfortunately, time is a pressure to us. With so many responsibles, ride-alongs is becoming a decreasing part of our responsibility. In the current environment, of course, there is no such thing as a ride-along. Just can't do it. So there's some ways in which we can now show the sales manager some of the areas that their sales force are struggling with without necessarily trying to dial into some of those calls. Another area which I'll table for your consideration as well is that as we live in a world where people are, in many countries now, working from their home study or even their lounge room for that matter, being able to self-manage yourself is not something everybody's comfortable with. And so sometimes people need extra support in that. So the sales managers are able to see that they've got some engagement issues with some of their folks who are normally performing at very high levels. But now they're seeing there's some engagement issues here. So that might be an indication that this is somebody who needs some help around that self-management, because working remotely for some folks is not an environment that they're happy with or they're comfortable with. So I think it's adding an extra dimension for sales managers to be able to support and develop their team. So so let's have a look at some of the reports that we were then able to share at this initial stage with the regional managers. So what we've got here is at a high level, the client could see the baseline proficiency. So what the participants knew coming into the Qstream is on the left, and the improved proficiency level we see when the Qstream is closed is on the right. So the first learning point for them was that knowledge levels were nowhere near as high as they'd anticipated. And this again raised other discussions about how much money they'd spent on training and how unexpected that baseline proficiency had been for them. The good news, however, was that they saw a tangible improvement in the field, and therefore there's a very real benefit for the business. And at this juncture, we then had to remind the client about the Harvard data and about Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. So we could consider these perfectly normal results, but it's the knowledge of this fact that it's the first step. So let's drill down a little bit further and let's look at the proficiency by country that the client was getting. And as you see there across the bottom, you've got Taiwan and India and ANZ. So we identified each country that for easy identification, they were looking at the proficiency level by country, and they were able to track each country on its improvement trajectory. And so this again was data that previously had been invisible to them in terms of knowledge and how that was going to impact upon their performance. But what I think is of far more interest to the business is what we see in a heat map, as here. So the heat map provides far more in-depth data points. And at the time, this enabled the regional management to identify the subjects that were of particular concern and how they varied, in some cases, country by country. So this meant that they could now pinpoint where they would invest, exactly what subjects needed their attention and the funding. And the black squared borders on the heat map on the right showed them exactly what they needed to focus on and where. So it didn't require them to go full on across all subjects and across all teams, which a funding would never been able to support anyway. So this targeted their spending and made their budgeting far easier, and also allowed us to demonstrate some of those solid ROIs that they'd initially referred to. So let me go the other way. There we go. So we'd reached the point whereby we'd been able to demonstrate some significant advantage to the business. So now it was agreed to expand the application of Qstream across some new topic areas. So we looked at other areas of the playbook. We looked at things like a qualification, and we looked at closing skills and so forth. The marketing department wanted to ensure that we then covered new product information and also general market information, such as oppositions and competitive threats and so forth. The compliance team, they had their own set of subject areas that they needed to ensure everyone clearly understood. So the risks were too severe to contemplate, and hence we built content based on their materials in conjunction with their subject matter experts. And again, that compliance had a bearing on their resellers and channel partners as well, as we can all appreciate. The finance department, they had some subject areas. So they wanted to focus on things like order recognition, currency changes, and even the grey market. The onboarding team saw this material as extremely useful as they brought on new hires, and the folks who were responsible for the graduate programs that they run also found that they now had an existing library, as it were, of content that they could use and apply to their groups as and when they saw fit. So it then got to the point whereby we were then dealing not only in the Asia Pacific and Japan region, we then became more of a global provider. So now we had other regions who were saying that they wanted immediate access to this existing library of content, because the playbook obviously was applied across all regions. So now we were able to make that available. We translated it into, Russian, Dutch, German, French, Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, and I can't remember what else. And we were able to make some slight variations to apply to various markets, as you would expect. And yes, we're also able to comply with the European Workers' Councils and all that local and regional privacy laws that are all required us to comply with. Excuse me. So this therefore meant that our client had regional insights and data, and they now had it, the capacity to look at it on global insights as well. So as we see here, we're now looking at it from various regions around the world. So we're still producing reports on a regional basis, and from a global basis, we can provide some insights now by region, by subject. Obvious applications when managing a global business to provide them insights, again, not previously available. So for our L&D contacts within that client, it meant a far easier conversation requesting budgets, as they could now clearly justify the requests that they were making for monies. They could also track the outcomes and show their senior leadership team the ROI that they had delivered. For the regional leaders, it meant not only the improved insights into leading and managing their region, it also supported their discussions with their global management. And I think it's important here to share some of the feedback that we received from the business and from various members. There is the capacity within the application for people to make comments, and we had some very generous comments. I'll just put a few up here. But generally, when we had comments from the sales reps, the fact that they liked it was it took very little time. It doesn't cut into my day and I can do this anywhere. Folks loved the fact that there was elements of fun and they won prizes. We had folks in India saying that they prefer to learn this way than in a training room. And comments such as not as boring as yet another video meeting. So in terms of this particular case study, all the issues that the client had asked us to fix, let's review the results that we're able to achieve. So we achieved a 94% engagement rate. And I'd like you to remember that this was a sales team that was almost exhausted by help platforms and tools. With over 20,000 challenge responses, we could provide sound, statistically relevant data points for all levels of management to make some legitimate decisions on. It demonstrated a 32.5% proficiency improvement. We had sales results were improved by 7.5%. Forecasting accuracy was dramatically improved. As I mentioned before, we were able to correct those anomalies. Negotiation skills improved, so there was less escalations, which improved the bottom line results. The senior leaders at country, region and worldwide now had this clear line of sight on data previously invisible. And now we were rolling it out to the reseller network and looking at how they could capitalize in on the content which was already available, built for our client. So our initial objective was to solve the problems that they'd identified and to deliver on those results with some very tangible business results. We had a very happy client from that, and it's a wonderful case study from our perspective on how we've been able to successfully apply Qstream to one of our clients on an expanded footprint as we looked at their business. So this presentation was designed to provide you with a high-level view to demonstrate how we applied Qstream, how we've delivered some solid business outcomes that impacted directly on their bottom line as well as to their daily and weekly operations. And with Qstream and our services team, we believe we've got a solution that drives our clients' business to greater success. And so in the interests of your time, thank you very much for your interest and your attention, and I will hand you back to Wayne.
Excellent, Chris. That was great. Thanks very much. Really, really insightful, very enjoyable. We have a couple of questions coming in. I would encourage any of the attendees to answer or ask any questions within the Q&A functionality. We have a question here, Chris. I actually have a couple of questions myself from that presentation, but there's a question here from Margaret. How would you ensure people don't get quiz fatigue?
Thank you. Excuse me, quiz fatigue. Well, what we found with Qstream is that because it's only 2 questions and it's spacing it, I think if we were to run a Qstream where we have questions going every day, I think you would get quiz fatigue. What we've done with this particular client and indeed with others is to make sure that it's only 2 questions every second day. And that seems to hit a sweet spot. What we've done in some of them is to put elements of fun as well. So we might start off with some softer questions and then increasingly make it more difficult. So we generally find very high participation rates. So I think that's probably, that would be my observations of of quiz fatigue. So we're not really seeing it, I guess, within Qstream.
Great, thanks, Chris. So there's another question here from Rena. Can clients edit content themselves, or do they need Validity tech intervention? So that's a really good question that you can maybe touch on, Chris.
No, it is a really good question. That we would be delighted for the client to take as much of this in-house as they possibly can. So in this case, we had a client who had no spare bandwidth. And in some of our clients, that is fairly common. Nobody is sitting around with nothing to do, as it were. Not that this takes an inordinate amount of time, but no, we can certainly train our clients to build their own Qstreams and to operate it as much as possible, and we do that extensively. So yes, bring it in house, or you can dial Validity up or down as you need us. So we like the tax department with that help.
Excellent, Chris. There's a great question here. I'm hoping I don't butcher your name, so apologies. So it's Venk Ataraman has a really good question. So Chris, from your experience, what kind of questions get maximum engagement from salespeople? I think that's a really interesting question.
It is a really interesting question, and I don't think there's one answer to it. I think what we found is that, for example, a client we're working with at the moment, different people have different issues that they deal with within their career. The bottom line is a sales rep wants to earn more money. So the more successful I am, the more money I earn, and that's my driver in all of this. So for some of them, it's the fact that if we're building a Qstream around objection handling, that's going to be their buzz points. For others, it's asking the closing question. And I would think statistically, most sales reps struggle with asking for the business. So I think you're going to find that it's going to be a different set of questions for different groups, but you will uncover that as you go through each Qstream. You will identify, especially if you start off with putting the playbook, I guess, as the diagnostic first up. That gives you a real sense of who is struggling with what. And once they recognize that they're struggling with it, there's generally an appetite to close the gap. So I hope I've answered that question.
Oh, very, very good. And a follow-up question, what sales enablement scenarios is Qstream not a fit for?
Is not a fit for.
Yeah.
So the thing about Qstream is if we look at it historically, where it started in Harvard Medical School, and it was designed to support medical students learn key parts of medicine. When it's used in universities and when it's used in teaching hospitals, again, it's used in high levels of science. When we look at our client base, and some of them are within the pharma industry, for example, they're looking at all sorts of intense information, disease states, contraindications, all sorts of things, very, very highly technical stuff, through to people who are selling just domestic products. And so whether it's product knowledge or whether it's sales skills or whether it's compliance, I can't honestly say that I've seen an area where it doesn't apply, because if we need them to learn something, if we need them to apply it in their careers, I can't honestly say that I've identified anywhere that it wouldn't be able to deliver.
And
good question.
That would be my response as well. I don't think there's any scenario that it doesn't work. There's another follow-up question from Rena. Chris, so did you research to find if smart sales reps answered what is the socially more acceptable answer, thereby getting high scores, versus his or her real on-the-ground performance? So are they working together? I think that's the kind of question. Are they answering just because that's what they feel they want people to answer, rather than what they individually would view as the correct answer?
Okay, that's a really good question. In terms of Qstream, for example, I would expect people to do that if they were going to be doing a psychometric assessment. Then they would be trying to give the answers that they would expect the interviewer to be looking for. In terms of Qstream, though, it's the way we're constructing the question, and it's the way we're constructing the responses, because the responses are, I mean, there is, for example, 2 correct responses in an answer. And it's the ones which are there which are not quite right. The ones which are structured to the point whereby the person answering the question or selecting the answer needs to really think about it. And so we'll dial that up or dial that down depending upon the level of difficulty. So, for example, we could only perhaps when we're constructing some of these responses for them to select, we don't want it to be seen as being tricky or that we're in any way tricking them into giving a false answer, but we really need them to think in some cases. So we're trying to be as challenging as we want to, and we encourage our clients when they're building the questions and the responses themselves to start off with, say, a level 1 and then build it up in terms of difficulty to a level 3. So it's the construct of the selection of the answers which will have a larger bearing on that. In a call center environment, I will tell you that we've had a client where the team will sit around together and they will answer the questions together. And that's because the team wanted to win the prizes. But that's still a learning experience. Absolutely. So I don't have a real problem with that. So
absolutely. There's a follow-up question here around multi-language rollouts. How are Qstream results different between English and non-English geographies?
Well, they're not at all. So as I've said, we translated it into excuse me, Russian and Portuguese and so forth. As far as the client is concerned, their sales process is their sales process. Now, they might make some slight variations in the way the playbook might be applied in some markets. That would be common in some of our clients in the way they approach China, for example. But the language variation is not going to make any difference to the constructs of Qstream. So
great.
Hopefully.
So we've no other live questions at the moment. I will give people a moment or two. Chris, if I could ask you a question around managers and the buy-in for managers around coaching. So just from your own experience, it's a very hot topic because of the remote working environment that we're all kind of living in at the moment with COVID. How important is it to get managers buy-in at the early stages of a program like this? And a follow-up kind of part 2 to that is, what do you see is the correlation between high coaching managers and high performance, high proficiency teams? So it's kind of a 2-part question around managers. I think it's a really important discussion point at this time that we're all living in.
Okay, no, all right. Let's. If I leave out part of your question, just remind me, Wayne, and I'll jump back in on it.
No problem.
The buy-in of managers, whether that's senior managers or let's focus in on the first line manager, the sales manager, because
yes,
these are the guys who do a lot of the heavy lifting. They're the guys who are running a team of anywhere from, I don't know what these days, 10 to, I mean, in one case, we had somebody responsible for 25 people. So these are the people who are looking for tools which will make their job easier. They need to, when we position this with them, we make sure they understand that this is a tool designed to help them, to give them focus. So when I was a sales manager and I would have to spend a day or 2 on the road with somebody, observing them in all sorts of sales situations or scenarios to perform my own diagnostic. Well, with Qstream, I don't have to do that. Qstream, it's giving me the information I would normally take days to be able to do. Now, if I've got 10 direct reports and I think of all the things I have to do as a sales manager in a month, am I really going to have enough time to do all that? So we need to make sure the sales manager understands this is not going to make his job harder. It's going to make his job easier because it's going to focus his attention. In this marketplace today, it's even more important. I mean, their job is incredibly difficult at the best of times for many of them. It's even worse during this pandemic because how do I motivate somebody sitting in their lounge room? How do I make sure that they're engaged? How do I know where they're struggling? Um, because salespeople, well, it's like a football team. They feed off of each other. They get their energy off of each other. In this environment, they're not getting that. So I think this sort of platform enables the sales manager to have more touch points with them, to gain some more insights. Not everybody is wired so that they are a self-manager. They're able to structure their days and monitor their days sitting in their lounge room. So the sales manager's role is to make sure that they can have those touch points. So I think if they understand how they can apply the tool and use the tool, then those sales managers enjoy it a lot. We do know that senior managers are generally the first ones who take this on board because they see the benefit and they will drive it. And if you can get an executive sponsor, then that will help even more. Am I answering your question, Wayne, or have I left anything out?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Thanks, Chris. That's a real, yeah, I think it's really important just in this world that we're living in right now that managers are bought in from the early stages because the impact from my own experience can be highly beneficial around driving that high engagement in the process and also that high proficiency that we're looking at. And ultimately, high engagement, high proficiency, you're looking will hopefully lead to high performance. So
Yeah,
great. I appreciate that. So it looks like we're all done at the moment. No more questions have come in. Chris, thank you very much. We're just coming up to the hour anyway. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. This has been a really, really interesting and informative session. I want to thank Chris Tandridge from Validity Group for his presentation. We may have one more question come in. We do, Chris. So just before we finish up, uh,
sure.
what kind of innovations can we expect from Qstream within the next 6 to 12 months? I'm happy to jump in here, Chris, if you'd like, or
I think
if
it's
you
a
want to take
question
it.
for you, Wayne.
Yeah, so there's a big push over the next year or so around video, around certification. These are areas that are already some of that functionality is already within the platform. I know Chris didn't touch on a lot of it today because he didn't want to do just a product demo. He wanted to really show you some tangible insights, but very much around video responses, so recording yourself, internal certification programs where you can tie that into your Qstream programs, and also areas around content hosting and other elements of that we're looking to embed into the platform as well. So these are some of the innovations that we're looking at over the next 6 to 12 months, and some of them are already in there at an earlier stage, which works really, really well. Great. I we'll give a minute or two, but I think we are just about to finish. So everyone on the call, thank you very much. We will send you a recording of the session as well, so you have access to that, and I'm sure there'll be some follow-ups at a later date as well. Chris, thanks very much again, and thanks to everyone, and have a good day. Okay, take care.
My pleasure. Thank you, everybody.